Right, so continuing where we left off with creating the housing, we've now got our actual housing created. What we need to do now is break through the pan floor into the pod below to be able to hollow the foam out and create space for the motor compartment, and then also the well where the dry shaft is going to follow through. Now obviously, because we've coloured the pan of the housing, we can't see through to see where the profile of the pod is, so we have another jig once again that we place inside that is profiled in the shape of the actual pod itself, cut off either end where the extension of the pod goes beyond the housing. I'm just going to mark it out and then mark out, leaving a partial flange at the top here, and at the back here on the pan floor I'm also going to leave a platform for our battery to partially rest on over here. So we're really just going to be taking out about roughly 2/3 of the pan floor. Thank you, my darling. Right, so you can see I'm going to leave a small flange around here just to allow strength at the back here. Leave a section about 60-65 millimeters. Partial battery pan. We can have another reinforced rib here with a platform on, and then this section over here is going to be a well where the dry shaft comes through. It also becomes a sponge well where we put some sponge in and pick up any moisture that's flapping around the board, and this area over here is going to be the engine housing or the motor housing. So we get to use much the same tools that we did when we hollowed out the housing. Little grinding disc. We'll use the little drum sander and perhaps a smaller radius as well. And what I like to do when I cut this out is actually come in from the line. I come in at least maybe 6 mil even, because remembering that the pod is coming down at an angle, so you don't want to cut into it. And I suppose, like my grandfather said, prevention is better than cure. Rather give yourself some room for error, working through a blind measurement or marking. You always grind the excess away. Cutter facing inwards, not outwards, whereas you could cut into the side of the pod. Okay, so you can see a very, I suppose we call it a conservative cut, coming about 6 mil all the way around. Just going to lift that section out, and there we can see the foam that we're going to remove. Before we start doing a bit of trimming, we'll just chuck some of that foam away. Right, so as you can see now, got the pod roughed out, got a better visual on where the actual pod wall is, and now I can go in with the radius cutter and trim the profile more accurately to marry up with the pod sides. What I like to do with the foam in the front of the pod, leave it there. This being an obvious direct impact zone, we don't need the clearance there, so I like to leave the foam in there, so if this pod happens, the face, which inevitably will be hitting something, will have far more structural strength than if it was hollow. So I just neaten this up here, and when we coat the inside of gel coat, we'll seal that foam nicely. Okay, now just to gouge out the foam from the back of the pod. Just use a stainless steel rod. You can see our pod, it's the foam structure staying up front. It's going to be reinforcing the front part of the pod, the back, got this section totally hollowed out here, so the dry shaft's going to go through. Exit out the back. We'll fill that in with the epoxy, makes it nice and solid. So, front section of this pod becomes the motor housing. In the back section here we have a platform that we create for the battery to rest on, and then in the back section here, this deep part here, I like to call this a sponge well. We put our sponges in, and any moisture that happens to end up being in the hole goes down, gets caught up in the sponges and kept from splashing around. This back section here, we leave that. Back section over here, we leave this as a platform for the battery to rest on as well. So we're going to leave all of this here, so when we paint it later on with the top coat, seal everything nicely, make it nice and shiny and make it look good, then we'll trim that afterwards just to save any unnecessary mess onto the board itself. So time for the green pepper, get the same treatment. So there we have our pods hollowed out. Just to reiterate, we have our foam up front in the nose of the pod, just to help with the reinforcement for future impact. Nice big area here for a low CG to get our motor as low as possible to reduce the thrust angle. And we're got a nice platform here for our battery to rest on. Dry shaft housing is going to be epoxied in this area over here, so we can have a good solid mount. And now it's just time to give it all a good coat with a top coat sealer. Okay, so what we're working with here is a top coat. It has the same viscosity as a gel coat, except that it has the percentage of wax within it that will rise to the surface and seal it. You can see it's a lot thicker than a resin. Got better filling qualities, and this is going to give us a nice smooth wipeable finish inside the housing. Makes it easy for cleaning the board out. It's just a nice finish. Let's just give the foam section some saturation. So there we have the top coat applied to the housing and the pod area. Gives us a nice smooth shiny finish, seals the cloth lamination very nicely. In front you can see where the foam in the pod is sealed, and we'll just wait for this to cure before we trim the edge flush with the deck. Right, so our top coat is cured nicely. It's time to trim away the extra cloth around the flanger. Just use a blade to start with. Just take away the excess cloth. There we have our housing pod area complete, hollowed out. Now ready for us to create our deflection rim, perimeter, and our hatch cover. Part 9 coming up.